here in the farm shop.
Yep.
The real deal.
The real deal. I swept the floor, but not much else.
If you would have done more than that, I would have been upset. You know that.
Yeah. Well,
Like all this stuff, this is real farming
Right.
happening around here.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. Just a messy farm shop. A dairy farmer's shop.
Yeah. Well,
Those are that's worse than most farms.
so what's going on in the shop right now? What are you working on?
I blew up my gearbox on my 5409 New Idea bar mower, so I got that rebuilt. But now I think I'm going to add another module to it to make it, 10 inches longer. So it's becoming a bigger project than I originally thought. So
Always modifying, right?
Yep.
So how'd you break it?
Oh, a couple of bearings went out. There's a spur gear on the bottom, and there's a bearing on a hex shaft on each side of the spur gear, and they just went out. And
So you were out mowing and
yep, and all of a sudden it got quite loud, and yeah,
time to go to the shop.
yeah, and then went and borrowed the neighbor's mower to finish up. So,
Yeah. Good thing for neighbors, right?
yeah, that's right.
So you almost died.
Yeah.
How did that happen? What's the backstory here? What was actually going on?
Well, it's kind of a blur, especially at the beginning of it.
Yeah.
I guess back in, would have been February, I just got what I thought was a cold and had a 5-day fever, and that's usually not like me. If I get sick, it's usually 1 or 2 days, and I'm back at it. And it was to the point where I didn't even want to leave the house. Like, I couldn't leave the house and come out to the barn, and that's usually pretty bad.
That's real sick.
Yeah. And after that, I was feeling really fatigued, the following week, and the following close to a month, my wife said I was complaining. I was, I'm just like, I am tired, and everything, the whole day just seemed to kind of be a blur. I just didn't feel right. And then I started getting these bruises on my shins, and they got really itchy. And I started getting some other rashes and went to the doctor. And I had told a buddy of mine too, I said, something's not right with my body. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
Hope it's not, cancer or something,
Right.
So I went into Linden Family Medicine, and they kind of told me, we think you're having some sort of allergic reaction. So they put me on a low dose of prednisone for about a week, and it didn't do anything. And I just I think about 10 days later, I started having stomach problems. I started having digestive issues, and that continued for about a week. Then I went back to the doctor, and he said, well, let's just take some blood. He didn't think it was anything serious. And so we took some blood. He called me that night, and he said, your platelets are dangerously low. And these are things I don't know anything about, right? So I'm like, well, what are my platelets?
Yeah, what's that mean?
Yeah, I'm not exactly a doctor, but so it's there's cells in your blood that help your blood clot. So I think I was at 20,000, which you're supposed to be above like 80 to 150. And so it was pretty dangerously low, but he told me he thought it was maybe a lab error. So he told me, come back in for blood. So that night, my wife and I went in. It's like 6 o'clock, and I had milked my cows that night, and my kids milked with me, but I was pretty unproductive. Like every step I took, my stomach hurt, like every step. And we did the blood test, and we got out of there. Lab results won't be back till the next day. And I just told my wife, I'm like, just take me to the ER. I don't feel good. And so got down to the ER. They admitted me right away. It was kind of nice because it wasn't busy because of COVID. Everybody's scared of the ER, right? So you don't have any nicks and cuts. And so got right in. And it was kind of a blur at that point. They diagnosed me with like 3 or 4 things, and they kept changing the diagnosis. And then they did a CAT scan. And I had a life-threatening blood clot in my portal vein that goes to my stomach and intestines. I don't know the technical word, but... So they put me on heparin right away, which is a blood thinner, and started me on warfarin. And I started to feel quite a bit better. They also put me on prednisone again. And I started to feel quite a bit better. I was eating, was in pretty good spirits. They were worried about leukemia, so they had to do they took a bone marrow, can't remember, sample or whatever.
Yeah.
So they had to stick the.
I remember they worried that my brother, he just had a virus, but they thought at one point it was leukemia when he was a kid. That was a really painful test, if I recall.
Yeah, it was kind of funny because I knew I was probably going to say something pretty bad because they're telling me how painful it is, right? So I just,
They jab a needle into your butt, basically.
Yeah,
and
and
take
they
a chunk of your bone.
drill through your hip. And so I planned out what I was going to say, and I just yelled Kelly Clarkson when it went through, like the movie, and everybody just started dying laughing. So that kind of took the edge off. But yeah, it was pretty painful, and everything came back good there.
You have to forgive me, I'm blanking. What movie is that again?
40-Year-Old Virgin.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
When he's getting the waxing
Yeah, the
done.
chest wax.
Yeah, Kelly Clarkson.
So I yelled Kelly Clarkson, and then they had a hard time getting through my bone, and I told them that's because I've drinking a lot of milk in my life. So
Yeah.
So yeah, we had some fun with it, but I was feeling pretty good at that point. They sent me home. I was extremely tired, but feeling pretty good, and I had to give myself a blood thinner shot in my stomach every night, and kind of laid around for a couple weeks. And after about a couple weeks, I started feeling good, and I was out pumping manure out on the fields and stuff. And then one day I started having stomach cramps, and I thought, I just had too much Mexican food, right?
Right.
But it started doing the same
thing that it was before.
Thing. And I was doing weekly blood tests, and my platelets were still low. They were like at 80,000, so they'd come up, but
Right.
and the hematologist was kind of like, well, your body's just recovering,
Right.
just give it some time. And so I went into the ER, I think 3 times. You have to ask my
Sheesh.
wife. I can't remember. She remembers it better than I do, but I know I went on Easter afternoon, and they just kept sending me home. And so I think
And you're feeling like something's not right
Yeah.
here. Like, come on, let's figure this out.
Yeah. And I told them I'm not like one of these ER frequent flyers, right? Like, so,
Yeah.
I think the 4th time I went in, there was a guy named, what was his name? He was from, can't remember what country he was from, but he was my lobotomist. He'd been taking my blood twice a day before. And he had actually Costa Rica. So he grew up on a farm in Costa Rica.
Okay,
So we were talking cows, and they milked like 30 cows by hand. And so he took my blood every day, or at least one of the 2 times.
Yeah.
And he came in my ER room, and he's like, what are you doing here again? And I'm like, they won't admit me. And he's like, we'll get you admitted. And he went and talked to somebody, and they admitted me. So
he knows if he has a background of dairy farming,
yeah,
he knows that dairy farmer
we're tough people.
is not messing around if he's coming back to the ER every day.
right. So thankfully he got me admitted. And the next about 10 days I was in there, and they were just confused what was going on. And I kept getting sicker and sicker to the point I wasn't eating anything. They did a colonoscopy, didn't really find much, just some, and so at one point, actually, a nurse that's married to my cousin, she came into my room, and she goes, you need to get to UW. Because this is during COVID, so I haven't seen anybody for 10 days, right? Like,
Right.
just phone calls. And she came in, and she's like, if you were my husband, I'd have you at UW. I said, okay. So the next time a nurse came in, I was like, I want to go to UW. And they were cool about it. They were just like, okay. And so I hopped in an old ambulance, which, not like the nice air ride, smooth ambulances. Like they put me on a stretcher in the back of it.
Yeah.
And it was a rough ride, man. Like down I-5.
And considering your condition,
Yeah,
which
it
is
was-
like massive, like internal pain.
Yeah,
right?
it was like the 1980s ambulance, like just because it wasn't an emergency transport. It was
Right.
so got down there, and I think the second night I was there, I was in a lot of pain. I mean, I didn't want to talk to anybody. I basically talked to my wife a couple times a day, and other than that, I didn't want to talk to anybody. I was just kind of.
Could she come down and be with you
No,
at all?
No.
Because this was like at the height of COVID.
She saw me.
stuff.
Yeah, she saw me when I came out to get in that old ambulance. She was able to say hi to me outside, and I love you and whatever. And
That's it.
yeah,
What were you thinking at that point? You have to be wondering, like,
yeah.
what am I going to see you again? Kind of thing.
Yeah, I
were
think-
you scared?
I think at that point I wasn't that scared yet. A little later I was, but I was kind of like been a pretty healthy person,
Yeah.
and I'm just kind of like, what's going on, you know? And so I got down there. I remember, you know, thinking about UW as this great hospital. I'd never been in there or visit anybody or anything. And I was in this room that was like, I swear it hasn't been remodeled since the 70s. And there's like a fan on the wall, like no AC. And I'm just like, oh, Bellingham was way better, like the comfort level anyways. And that's just one wing. I ended up being in a lot of different spots in that hospital. But so that first night, I didn't sleep. I was in a lot of pain. It was hot. And the second night, they came in, they said, we're going to do another CAT scan. And kind of like, well, I've had 5 CAT scans. Like, you know, how much more radiation can I handle, right? Like, okay. Yeah. And we just want to make sure. So I'd had all those CAT scans done in Bellingham. So went and did one. And they come in my room, and they're like, you're going into emergency surgery tonight. And I'm like, for what? And I had a hole in my large intestine, and it was perforated bowel. That's what they call it, I guess. And so my feces were leaking out inside of my body. And so,
what causes that?
Well, at that point they hadn't figured it out.
But not good.
They knew I had extremely high eosinophils, which is a type of white blood cell that it's like the allergy blood cell, like gets really high when it's when you have an allergic reaction. And they weren't sure why. But so I called my wife and I said, they're putting me into surgery, and they told me she could come down. So she came down, and she was with me for about 3 hours before I went under, because I was on warfarin. So my INR level, which is the blood thickness, was too high. So they're giving me
you off to that before they cut you open.
So they're giving me vitamin K to
thicken your blood.
Yeah. So I'm just sitting waiting, and then they had to do COVID tests and all that crap before I could go into surgery. So she got down there, and I went into surgery that night, and I was under for 24 hours, under the sleep for 24 hours.
How long were you in surgery for?
I think they did like 6 or 7 hours initially, and then they didn't close me up because they wanted to see if some of the tissue in my intestines would improve. And so then later they did another, like, I don't know, 5 or 6 hours. But like, so there was a time period where I was out.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. Pretty crazy. And I actually remember, like just waking up and like feeling like I had a rope down my throat, which was a ventilator, right? Like,
right.
And I'm just kind of like, I didn't open my eyes, but I'm just kind of like, what the heck is in my throat, you know?
Yeah.
And I had these, my arms were locked down, and I'm trying to get them loose. And there was one that was Velcro, and I got it loose, and I just kind of started waving. And then the nurse is like, are you in pain? And I'm like, I just kind of nodded, and then I was out. And that happened 3 times. So I'm assuming that's when I was like laying there in between the surgeries.
And they're probably like, we'll give him a bit more if he's aware and in pain.
Yeah. But I didn't know what was down my throat, I just like.
So what did they find?
So
what was going on in there?
Hypereosinophilic syndrome.
What the heck is that?
It's just elevated eosinophils that it's basically your immune system is just going crazy to the point that all your capillaries and blood vessels are clotting. So like
your body is attacking itself.
Yeah. And so they said something triggered it, like a virus could trigger it, or just a food or whatever, allergic reaction or whatever, but they were never able to figure out what triggered it. So they used prednisone, 80 milligrams of prednisone daily to suppress my immune system initially. So I woke up in ICU on a IV food. What do they call it? I can't remember, but yeah. So I couldn't eat. I couldn't drink water because I had an NG tube, so a tube that went up my nose, down my throat, pretty uncomfortable.
Yep.
I had lost 60 pounds in a month, and yeah. And so then there was still a lot of questions, right, at that point. So,
but it was that moment that they had saved your life, basically.
Yeah.
If they hadn't have done that then, what would have happened?
Yeah, I'd have been dead. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. They told me that if I would have stayed 2 or 3 more days in Bellingham, I would have been dead. So I was lucky I went down there.
So, but the surgery like stopped that? You were okay then? They knew you were going to make it then? Or was it still up in the air?
I had 2 doctors that did the surgery. So the first one did the initial 8 hours, and then another one finished it up. And he came in and he goes, in 30 years I've been doing this, I've never seen someone look so good coming out of that. It's what you just went through. And I'm like, man, I don't feel very good,
Wow.
But there was a lot of, that wasn't the end of it. So I ended up, I'm trying to think if I was in the hospital a total of like 8 or 9 weeks. I couldn't walk. So I had to, all of a sudden I'm like walking with a walker one day was like a big accomplishment, right?
Yeah.
Couldn't even hold my toothbrush, like stand up without almost passing out. And
Just because you were that weak.
yeah, I just lost every bit of muscle and fat I had, and I was just looked like a refugee of some sort. So
What were the conversations with your wife at that time when it was still up in the air and they had done surgery and you didn't know what was going on?
Just a lot of I love yous and yeah, she's a pretty strong person. She's stronger than I am. So yeah, it was
I just can't imagine, especially in the middle of COVID when
Right.
it's like you can't even really be together. The world already feels like it's going crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And then to be facing death.
right. There was times where I was crabby because I was just in pain.
Yeah.
And so I was short with her and
Yeah.
whatever else. And I think that was hard for her to deal with.
Yeah.
That's the last way you want to, maybe it's the last time talking to your husband, right? And he's in a bad mood, right? But yeah, it was crazy. And then I ended up finally getting out of there. And then about 2 weeks later, I had to go back in because I had an abscess in my abdomen.
So they cut you open again?
They just stuck in a drain. So they had to do a procedure, but I had to be in another, I think I was in there another 8 days. And painful, just, yeah. And I'm on I woke up with an ileostomy bag. So now,
Yeah.
so all those things were pretty overwhelming.
A lot of, no pun intended, crap to deal with.
Exactly.
Brutal.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the recovery process been like? Like, when were you able to get back to the farm? That's what you do. Like, you eat, breathe, sleep, farming.
Yeah. I would say even when I was in the hospital, I think your mind and your body knows you're in danger. And I just didn't even care about the farm. Thought more about my family than the farm. And, yeah, I was just trying to, I had enough to deal with, right? Mentally, physically. But yeah, I got back out, I was out walking and stuff, when we did first cutting, which it would have been in late May. But just very weak. I remember I was trying to couple a garden hose together, on one of our water troughs out in the field, and my wife had to hold one end, and I was just shaking, could barely just simple things that you don't think about being hard. It was a long process. And then I was getting weaned off the prednisone, so I would have withdrawals and sweats, and I hit walls during the day. I just get tired.
Yeah.
But I'm on a biological shot that controls these eosinophils, so I get it every 8 weeks. I'm totally off the prednisone, and yeah, they don't know if I need it even, right? But it's not worth the risk to.
Right, exactly.
They don't know if it would come back or.
You don't want to go through that again.
No. And then, so this November, the 9th, I have a surgery to reconnect my intestines. So I'm going bagless, so.
I bet you're pumped about that.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting. So.
Even though surgery is not fun.
No, and that's another 8 to 10 weeks of laying around.
Oh, man.
Because I couldn't lift more than 8 pounds or they said I couldn't lift more than 8 pounds for, I think it was 8 weeks, and then not more than 30 for 12. And 8 pounds is a gallon of milk, right? So
try to do that on a dairy farm.
Right. So I probably cheated a little bit on that, but I didn't.
But if they just cut you open, that has to heal. Otherwise, it's going to pop back open.
Yeah, hernias and whatever. So you don't want to be back in for that. And
No.
I tried to do my best.
Yeah.
But
how did the farm stay going? Who kept things rolling?
Well, I have an amazing employee. First of all, Marcos. He's just the best. Like, he stepped up to the plate and did a lot of stuff. And then my dad, and a bunch of friends of mine and neighbors, and yeah, that was probably like, it was, I don't know, if any good came out of this, like for me to realize like who has your back, like when you're down. So,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, a lot of people, it was like overwhelming, I think, for my dad. Like, people were calling wanting to help, and he's like, well, like, I already have like 10 people helping out. Like, we don't need any more. So, yeah, that was pretty cool.
That's interesting, because on this podcast, I've heard the opposite thing, where it was your dad calling to help others. I think it was Larry Stapp talking about when his son Mark passed,
right?
And your dad calling him and coming out and just, I don't remember what cutting it was, but they just took care of it, him and some neighbors and stuff.
Yeah, I remember that. I didn't know my dad had done that, but Larry had texted me when I was pretty much laying on the couch watching Netflix there for a while. Yeah, he had told me that, so that's pretty cool. I didn't know he had organized that. I remember it happening when everybody went out and mowed and chopped his grass, and I think a couple of us kids went out and helped cover the bunker and stuff, but I don't.
That's just the way in this community, though.
Right.
Like, people are just going to step up and get it done.
And sometimes, like, there's days like you're like, Lyndon, like, you know, like,
right?
It's annoying. Like, it's like a whose bed of your boots been under kind of town, you know what I mean? But like, when it comes down to it, like, yeah.
There's the good and the bad.
Right. It's a small town stuff, right? But
exactly. So talk about your farm. How big is your farm? What's it all about? You do organic dairying. What does that mean?
So I farm. This is my dad's farm. I rent. I don't own any real estate. So my dad has 127 acres here. About 75 of it is actual farmland or pasture land, and the rest is woods and wetlands. Then we have a CREP project, and I probably farm like around 250 total acres, rented other acres.
By CREP project, what is that?
That's like a salmon restoration project. In the middle of our farm, there's a dip, and it's all peat ground, and it was hard to farm. Couldn't get on it till June usually, and we used to pasture the dry cows and heifers in it, and my dad got offered good money to put it into pretty much a little wildlife preserve, I guess you would say. So,
well, that makes sense, right?
Right. He always thought he could, buy a couple loads of hay with the money he of nice hay, right? Better hay than that land produced with the money he got for the CREP project.
And how many head of cows do you milk? Yeah, tell me about your herd.
So I milk milking about 95 cows right now, and it varies between 90 and a little over 100. And I ship to Organic Valley. Well, at one point I was milking here and the neighbor's place, and it started off I was actually shipping milk to Twin Brook Creamery at the neighbor's, and that didn't work out for several different reasons. And that ground had been certified organic before, and so I was able to get it certified and get on with Organic Valley there. And so then I was milking organic cows there and conventional cows here at home. And then I think that was in 2016. And so like 3 years ago now, I sold the conventional cows and brought the organic cows home and just milk organic cows.
So what does that mean, organic cows? What does it take to be able to call yourself that?
Well, number one, you got to graze, right? So we have to have over 30% of our dry matter intakes from our cows come from fresh pasture. So that's something I've always done. I grew up doing rotational grazing. My dad was kind of on the cutting edge of like New Zealand style grazing. So that wasn't much of a transition for me at all. We can't use any hormones for heats or reproductively. All our grain that we buy is certified organic, which is a little more expensive. Fly control, everything has to pretty much be all natural, right? No GMOs. all that good stuff. So,
how hard is that to do, to make those changes and to make it work?
I guess there was a learning curve, but for me, I've always kind of been, I don't know, like I got a buddy who says I'm just a pair of Jesus sandals away from being a complete hippie, right? Like, so I don't know. I like different things. Like we already were using tree swallow boxes as nesting boxes to bring tree swallows in for fly control. Like when I was conventional. So I always was like messing around.
So
with
that's like you attract the birds and they eat
like
the flies.
If I don't know, I'm kind of a wildlife junkie. So
yeah.
The swallows that have the white bellies, you'll see them on the power line sometimes. Yeah. There used to be a lot more of them. And with, there's less woodlands around and whatever else. And there's just not as many of them. And so my dad and I put up like 10 boxes the first year and they were all full. And so then we just kept like hammering out these boxes. And like if you go out there, they're on like every other fence post. You face them to the southwest. And I remember my dad was like drilling one up and there's like swallows going in it, like as he was like, this was a couple years after we'd had a few, because like all these swallows are returning.
Are in a housing crisis. They're
right, and they
grabbing up real estate as quick as they can get it.
They had too many kids the last couple of years, so now they're just everywhere. Like
what I didn't know is that those help with fly control.
Yeah, like the barn swallows, the orange bellied ones that usually nest in your garage over your car.
Yeah,
like same thing. They just swoop around and eat. I think they eat like, I can't remember what it is, but it's like 5 times their body weight in insects a day or something like that. So if you think about that, so if you have, 1,000 swallows flying around, they eat a lot of bugs. And so if you watch my cows on pasture, the swallows are just flying under, I call them my fly dive bomb crew. So
that's awesome.
So I've always been into kind of stuff like that. So I think when I started organic, I never wanted to go organic. I never believed in it. I was kind of like, I had Organic Valley approach me several times about going organic, and I was kind of resistant to it. Basically, hard economic times brought me to that point.
Yeah.
And so I started over there, and I thought, well, if I have a sick cow, I can treat it with antibiotic, or bring it home and treat it with antibiotics. Well,
because you had an organic and not also a conventional.
And that was my justification for...
Right. Well, because that's the hard part is you want to treat a sick cow and give them antibiotics just like a human would, but there are 0 antibiotics allowed in organic dairying.
Right. So that was my first, okay, that's how I'll do it, right? And after 2 years, I had moved 3 cows. So I was like, well, is it really worth it to be milking my 120 cows here at a loss to move 3 cows a year? No. So and then I had learned a lot since then. Like organic dairy farming to me is about prevention of disease, not treatment. And which you don't make money treating disease anyways or sickness, right? It's all about prevention. So you have to be proactive. About culling too. Like if I have a cow that I think is going to be a health problem or have a health problem, she goes to beef before that happens. And then what you end up doing is you cultivate natural selection. And so if I have a cow that won't breed and I had to give her an estromate shot to get her to come and heat, but why would I want a daughter just like her, right? Mm-hmm. I want cows that are going to breed when I breed them. So that's a big part of it. So proactive culling, and then you end up just having a healthier herd, and you end up, I think health is health is genetic and environmental, right? So you try to get keep calves out of your best cows, problem-free cows, and keep a clean environment, and it's actually worked out way better than milking conventional cows for me. So.
And it's really starting to rain out there.
Yep.
The fall rains have finally showed up.
Yep.
Today is the day.
Yep. Good time to sit down for a podcast, right?
Exactly. So for you, going organic was pretty natural. Even though you hadn't wanted to do it in the past, it was pretty natural. And now you're like, this is great? You're into it?
Yeah, I'm gung-ho about it. There's just...
Is it worth it? like, because you go to the store, you're definitely going to pay quite a bit more for organic milk at the store. But does that translate to you? Do you make enough to make those changes pay, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I get paid quite a bit more.
I mean, that's what needs to happen for this system to
Right,
work.
and the market stability, right? I know our milk price varies seasonally, but I know what it's going to do. Now, we took a pay cut like 3 or 4 years ago where we actually took a pretty big hit, and that hasn't returned to us yet. But since then, it's been very consistent, so you kind of know what you're going to get. And that's a big part of it because...
Why is it like that? Why is the organic market so much more stable than the conventional?
Probably just less people doing it.
Yeah.
Organic Valley has a quota system, so we can't ship more than what our quota is.
Right. Dairy Gold does though too, right?
Right. Yeah. In the recent years, but Organic Valley is like the biggest organic dairy processor or co-op in the country, right?
So it is a cooperative.
It is a cooperative, yeah. So there's some like newcomer, like there's a big dairy, Aurora Dairy, organic dairy. Like there's been more stuff popping up, so there's more and more competition in the marketplace, and that's probably why we had to take our pay cut.
Yeah.
A few years ago. Hope to get it back soon, but we'll see. But yeah, for me, it wasn't this huge. Like almost everything, I don't do a lot of stuff different. I mean, I'm always learning, but yeah, like it's not like I went from a confinement TMR, just like like
hardcore full conventional.
Right, I think that would be a lot harder transition, right? Because pasturing in itself has a learning curve. I remember my dad said he one day he was like in the barn and he's like, all I do is scrape manure and milk cows, and he just like let the cows out. And they were Holsteins, and he said like that first couple years he got like 40 pounds of milk, like just it was just a learning curve, right? Like
right.
And then we started intensive grazing, and yeah.
What does that mean, intensive grazing? Like how does it actually work?
So it depends on the time of year, but early on in the year I'll try to move the cows every 12 hours, every milking, when the grass is just really growing.
So like in what, March?
I usually don't get them out till late April. It depends on the year. There's times they've been out in March, but not very often. I like the grass to get going a little bit because sometimes I've let them out earlier, but you let them out and they eat everything, and then you get like this kind of weather for 10 days, and then like you got to bring them back in. And so I've always liked to wait till late April, early May.
Because if they go tromping around in a grass field and it's raining out, like we hear the rain on the tin right now in the shop here, they're just going to make a muck hole, right?
Right. And then your photosynthesis is like when it's like this, slows way down, so your regrowth is so much slower. So I'll move them every 12 hours early, and then I kind of transition slowly into a daily move because the grass will start to slow down, right? And so I use temporary fencing. They're all on reels, these Gallagher fencing reels, and I do it that way because some people do paddocks, like they'll do this 2.2 acre paddock and whatever else. Well, I feel that the grass is so different at different stages that you can't lock yourself into 2.2 acres because 2.2 acres in July might mean 6 hours of grazing,
right? And
in May it might equal 12 hours of grazing or 24 hours of grazing, right? So like I use these pigtail posts, and I'm out there just
moving your fence all the time, so the cows are eating different parts of your grass,
right?
And what does that do for the cows, and what does that do for the grass?
So the grass stops growing like for 3 or 4 days every time it's cut or grazed off. So if your animal's just grazing and grazing and grazing, or every 4 days grazing the same blade of grass, or 5 days, like every time you're just stunting it. So it increases your yield just tremendously.
So they can eat it down, and then you get off of that grass, so it can be undisturbed for a while. And
and then they're also getting the best quality of fresh feed, right? You don't want it too mature, you don't want it too young, and so that's kind of it's kind of an art. I think it's more of an art than a science.
Yeah.
I've been moving cows since I was like 12. My dad kind of, my dad always had a day job. So, I kind of.
Yeah, talk about your background. So your dad was a dairy farmer as well, but like you said, he had a day job.
Mm-hmm.
What did you grow up around? What was he doing? What did his dairy look like back in the day when you were 12 learning to move cows?
Early on, I just remember him milking all the time, and milking with him late nights in the barn, and then I don't know when he got his day job, but he was always dabbling in something. So like this shop used to be full of grass seed. He was dealing grass seed out of here with his brother. Like I remember it was to the trusses full of grass seed. Like we couldn't park anything in here. And his brother passed away, and they were doing construction in that, and that kind of fizzled when his brother passed away, and he was on the farm for a while, I think, and then he got a job with Boss Agronomy, and he's kind of a self-made guy. Like he didn't finish college, but he went and became an agronomist, and now he's a certified crop advisor, and so he was. Yeah, he would be in the summer. He would be on the phone or gone all the time, and then he would milk on Saturdays because our hired man lived in the mobile home here for like 13 or 14 years. Had Saturdays off, so
that was his day off.
And that was our work day too. Like had off school, and like we knew there was something going on, and I was gonna be milking with my dad or whatever.
Yeah.
And then as I got older, I did a lot of milking. He would always say, "Hey, can you start milking for me?" And he might as well just said, "Can you milk for me?" Because he'd come home like when I had 5 cows left, and I'd be like, "I thought I was just gonna start." And like, "Oh yeah, I got busy, But I don't know. He's a busy guy, and yeah.
What about his dad? What's your family heritage going back generations?
I pretty much have dairy farmers on every side of me. So, like my grandpa just quit on my mom's side. Just quit farming. He's still farming, but he sold the cows a year ago. So, and then my mom's dad farmed over on Benson Road where Ray Stite farmed.
Yeah.
And so just dairy farmers everywhere. So then my grandpa moved here, I think in 1956
from
he actually farmed on Central Road. Before this. You'd have to, if my dad was here, he'd probably be like, "No, it was 1954 or whatever." But
in the 50s.
Yeah. So he moved here. He was a World War II veteran, and so he kind of got a late start in life after the war and everything.
Yeah.
And he came out here and bought this place from Ernie Crandall, and there was 3 farms on this road. There was the Kings, the Hallbergs, and the Groens. And my grandma said that all her friends were like, "I can't believe you're moving out there with that man. Like, that's just way out in the boondocks, like just all woods and in the hills up here." So, yeah. And so, he was a cattle dealer and milked cows, and
But dairy roots way back. And even before him, back to Netherlands, maybe? Do you know?
His dad farmed his dad, he grew up in Minnesota. So I'm not sure if his dad, I think he was a butcher or something. I can't remember. But my grandma Groen, my dad's mom, grew up on a dairy in the Netherlands. So,
it does go back to the old country. Right. So when did you have the awareness that you wanted to do this? That you wanted to continue the family legacy of dairy farming?
I think early on I did, and then you get to that point where you're a teenager and there's so much more exciting things like girls and being able to do stuff. So there was a time there where I'd much rather be doing something else.
Yeah.
And then I got, my first real job, I guess. I worked on some dairy farms, but then I worked at Boss Agronomy, driving crop sprayer. Mm-hmm. And then I think about then I kind of realized I kind of miss the farm now that I have to work every day, and make a living. And then I worked for my dad for a couple years. And this is in between going to school in Minnesota.
Where'd you go to school?
Ridgewater College. It's in
Okay.
Wilmer, Minnesota. They had a 2-year ag program. Yeah, so I spent some time out there, worked on some dairies out there. And
Nice.
yeah.
And came back here, and you were, basically.
Well, it was kind of like my dad called me, and so his employee of 13 years, I think they just had enough of each other. Like,
yeah.
he told him to do something, and he said no. And my dad's like, what? He's like, no. And he's like, well, you're fired. And he was like, no, I quit. and he left, and like, I think they both regret it. So he came back here like a few years ago, and he was just like, missed the farm, right?
Yeah.
Like, his kids grew up here and stuff. But after that, my dad had a hard time finding help, and he had his day job. And he called me. He sold most of his cows, but he always had this problem where he had way too many heifers. So like, he had sold pretty much the dairy herd while I was in college. All of a sudden, he was milking like 60 cows again, and he was just like, it was springtime, and he called me, and he's like, hey, I'm selling these cows, and like, so if you're not going to come back and farm, these cows are leaving. Well, I was like big into the registered Jersey scene. Like, I loved cows, and like, that kind of was like, well,
What does that mean, registered Jersey?
just purebred registered cattle. I did a lot of showing. I was really into that. And so I was pretty attached to some of those cows. So he's like, well, if you're not, if you can't come up with the money to buy these cows by June 1, then they're gone. So I applied for an FSA loan, and I got it, surprisingly. And yeah, I bought 60 cows and some heifers and started renting the dairy. So
What did your dad
since.
say at that time? Did he think that you were going to pull it off, or did you surprise him?
I don't know. There's days I think he still doesn't think I'm going to pull it off, but I think
This is how Dutch fathers
Right.
are. How do I know? I have one.
Right.
Same thing.
he was, I don't know. He was encouraging. I get like early on, he was very hands-on, and I didn't know what. Like, I remember running in my farm and my egg business classes. Like, we had this computer program called FinPack that would do these cash flows, and we had to do a FinPack on our home farm or a farm we knew.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'd just be like, I don't know how you don't make much money. I was just had it all.
Yeah.
And he's like,
Idealistic. And
Right,
he's
and then
like,
I got
It's
home.
harder than you think.
and I was kind of a hot mess for quite a while, like just my organization and running in circles, because you
Yeah.
know how it works, but you always had dad to ask, right? Like,
Yep.
or dad there to do this, or he was the,
So he basically said, hey, it's your baby now. And he was doing his day job and other stuff. And it was your baby.
He always said he would come yell at me in the morning when I was milking, just to get me fired up, and then he'd leave. and
Sounds like a Dutch dad thing to do.
yeah, so yeah, I mean, and then as things went on, he just got more and more hands off. I mean, he still helps me a lot, but like, as far as cows, like, he trusts me with the cows and leaves me alone for the most part. But yeah, that was 08. I bought the cows in June of 08, and milk price was good, and I thought, this is easy. And then 09 happened, and I was getting like $12 a hundredweight, right? And lost a lot of money in 09. And then yeah,
How
it's been
did
a roller
you
coaster since.
survive? What do you have to do to survive something like that when you're just starting and you don't have that like base to draw on?
I never left. It's kind of like if I went to town, I was going to spend money, right? Like, every time you drive into town, you're going to spend money either on gas or you stop somewhere, right? So I was like,
Super frugal.
yeah,
Yep.
for quite a while there. I've gotten less frugal as I have more kids and but
Yep.
yeah, I just stayed home and milked my cows.
Yeah. Talk about your family. You've got kids out here on the farm. They help with the cows and everything too.
Yeah, so I'm on my second marriage. I got married 2 Augusts ago, and she had 3 kids, and we had 2 of our own. We have 2 of our own together now, and I had 1 original. So we have 6 kids in the house.
Busy.
Yeah, and so yeah, it's crazy.
And you
They're
just,
doing internet schooling right now.
Oh boy.
That's why I'm so glad to be out of the house.
Well, and if I'm right, your wife was pregnant when you were going through this whole health ordeal
Right.
that you
Yep.
had.
Yep. So,
oh man, can't imagine what was going through her mind.
yeah, my mind too. I was just like, I'm gonna, like, as things weren't going well, it's like I can't leave her with all these kids, and yeah,
But she did it.
yeah.
That's not easy duty.
No, she's a pretty strong person.
I have 2 kids, and I don't know if I could manage by myself.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what that
I
meant.
mean, everybody says like 6 kids is so hard. I mean, I don't know. Like the older one, because they're so spread out, the older ones are so helpful, right? So like, change that diaper, or so it's not that bad, but yeah.
And that's been the story of family farms and dairy farms for, our parents and grandparents and beyond. Those are always big families too, and everybody kind of pitched in.
Right.
I mean, the joke was always that it was more people to work on the farm, but it was also more people to get the house stuff done. And
Yep. I'm coming into my golden age of labor here pretty soon. So
yeah, you'll have lots of hired help, aka kids.
Right. Exactly.
Send out and get all your work done.
That's good for them.
So, what do you think the future holds for you? You want to see your kids continue it on?
I'd like to see them do that. I don't know if they will. I doubt it, but I'm not going to discourage it.
Yeah.
Some people are like, "Oh, I don't want my,"
Yeah.
but I think that's a bad attitude. I think.
Yeah. Some people are like, "No, my kids have to carry on the farm."
Yeah. No, that's not
like
me
the
either.
opposite.
No.
Yeah.
So I hope so. But we'll see. I mean, my stepkids, they are coming into this kind of like, it was kind of a shock, right? Like my wife's oldest, Ryan's, came here when he was 17, right? And like all of a sudden he has to work. So I don't think he's going to be coming back, you know what I mean? And the younger ones are starting to really enjoy it. But yeah, and then my daughter Kenya's really into animals, but she likes horses, so yeah, I don't know. We'll see.
What do you think since you're an organic guy and you really like embrace that, what do you think the future of that is? Is that the way of the future for producing food, for producing dairy?
Good question. It's my future.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, you don't see yourself going back.
No, I don't think it will go away, and I think it'll continue to grow. But I'm not sure if it would be the only way of. I don't think that'll ever happen. But yeah, your guess is as good as mine. But I enjoy it, and I believe in what I do. I'm not going to run anybody else down for what they do or believe in. But I switched for the milk check, totally.
Right.
But as I got into it, it's kind of like you're farming like with nature, like you're not fighting nature.
Right.
And that's how, like, I'm kind of a nature guy, like, so.
Yeah. So that's kind of your perspective on sustainability, to bring in the buzzword.
Yeah, the buzzword. Yeah, I guess for me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not for everybody, but
yeah,
I enjoy it and I believe in what I do, and yeah.
Yeah, you talked earlier about, converting some land back to like wildlife habitat and different things like that. Sounds like environmental protection and sustainability are pretty important to you and your family's value system.
Yeah.
In farming here.
Yeah. And I think most farmers feel that way. I mean, there's a lot of those salmon restoration projects around stream buffers and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
So what would you tell folks? There's controversy about dairy, right? Can I really trust dairy? And, some people have more trust, say, for organic dairy like you do. Some people think all dairy is bad. What do you say to that? Since you're on the ground doing it, like, are those concerns valid? What is the right thing?
Well, drinking milk is biblical, They didn't call it, they call it the land of milk and honey.
Yeah,
they
that's
didn't,
true.
so.
It's true.
I think it's been a source of protein and nutrition since the beginning of time. I think like veganism is a North American problem, like a North American thing. Like where else in the world? It's because we have too much money, right? Like somewhere else you might be a vegan, but it's not by choice. Like,
right.
You're hoping that you're going to have some meat once a month or or whatever. So I think that's just, with money comes these weird ideas. It's just like you see like these young celebrities, right? They start off normal and then they kind of go wacko at like 30 years old and kind of go off
the money and power goes to their head.
It's not natural, right? And so dairy is not scary at all. It's we're not going to change any vegans' minds, right? Like they have to change. You don't change anybody's mind, period, on anything. So they have to just see what it is, what you do, and if they agree with it and are down with it, then they are. And if they aren't, they aren't. Like, you don't change people's minds. So all you can do is kind of let them in on what you do. So, and people, like, I think if you think the same you did 10 years ago about everything, that's a bad sign, because it means you're not learning, right? So it's okay, to change your how you feel about something.
100%. Yeah.
And so some of these people, they change. I have a buddy I talked to the other day. He married a vegan, or she was a vegan, and he actually we used to do pastured chickens out here, and he was doing that with my dad at that time. And she came out and saw how we were doing the whole thing, and she was like, "Oh, I'm okay with that." But she had read some book when she was 12. He said that, some veganism book, I guess, and that's how she had
something that portrayed farming as
right. And I think she's still like
harmful.
They buy half a beef from us every year, and she's very like into organic and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But yeah, she's not a vegan anymore. So people change, and all you can do is open their eyes to what you do, and what they think of it is their deal. So
thanks for having me out to the shop.
No problem, anytime.
I appreciate it. Listening to the rain come down out there. Not too much to do out in the field at this moment.
Nope.
So it worked out well. And my favorite place to do an interview is in a real shop. It even smells like a real shop in there. A little bit of oil and diesel and dirt and manure and all the good stuff on a real dairy shop.
That's right. Where you can't find any tool you need.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.